It makes sense to assume that when you finally stop reacting, they will eventually just go away. Everyone thinks that if you cut the cord, if you stop feeding the drama and simply pull your energy back, the narcissist will get bored and move on to an easier target. You go completely cold, you lock your emotional doors, you refuse to engage, and you wait for the silence to arrive. Carl Jung knew this was the logical assumption, but he also understood why it almost never happens that way. The silence does not come. Instead, something far more chaotic takes its place, and the reason why contradicts everything you think you know about what happens when you walk away. Before we go any further, if this kind of exploration matters to you, consider subscribing. The algorithm only shows the deeper layers to those who signal they want to see them, and in the next layers is where things get truly uncomfortable. That was layer 0. The surface belief. The idea that ignoring them equals peace. But if you look closer, it is not exactly like that. Let me tell you what actually happens when you stop caring. The first thing you notice is not a quiet retreat, it is an explosion. You withhold your reaction, you stop arguing with their twisted version of reality, and suddenly the volume goes up, way up. You thought that withdrawing your presence would deprive them of their fuel, and slowly, like a fire without oxygen, they would just burn out and leave you alone. But instead of the fire dying out, it violently flares up and threatens to burn the entire house down. The flames reach higher than they ever did when you were actively trying to put them out. A survivor recently shared a story that might sound incredibly familiar to you. They had spent months trying to reason with a narcissistic partner, getting nowhere, drowning in constant gaslighting. Every argument was a maze where the survivor ended up apologizing for things they never did. The exhaustion was absolute. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. The kind that makes you question your own sanity, the kind that makes you forget who you were before you met them. Finally, they decided to go completely gray rock. No emotion, no defending themselves. Just flat, boring, unresponsive silence. They stopped explaining. They stopped defending. They stopped caring. They thought this would be the end of it. They thought the narcissist would see that the game was over and pack up their bags, retreating to find a new source of drama. Instead, what followed was a rapid-fire sequence of absolute madness. Within a single week, the partners cycled through 10 different manipulation tactics. First, they showed up uninvited at the survivor's house, leaving frantic, emotionally charged voicemails. They banged on the door, oscillating between furious demands for an explanation and pathetic, tearful pleas for one last conversation. When that did not work, they suddenly faked a severe medical emergency, claiming they were in the hospital and needed help immediately. They knew the survivor was an empath, so they aimed directly for the guilt. They played the victim card with terrifying precision, weaponizing the very empathy they had spent months exploiting. When the survivor did not break their silence even for that, the partner instantly pivoted. They went from a manufactured crisis to a vicious, orchestrated smear campaign, spreading malicious rumors to all their mutual friends. They claimed the survivor was abusive, unstable, cruel. They threw everything at the wall just to see what would stick. They were desperately trying to find a new trigger because the old ones had stopped working. The silence was deafening to them, and they were willing to orchestrate an entire symphony of chaos just to hear the sound of the survivor's reaction again. They could not accept that the game was over. They could not fathom a reality where their actions had no consequence on the emotional state of the survivor. You see, in behavioral psychology, there is a concept called an extinction burst. When a behavior that was previously rewarded is suddenly no longer rewarded, the subject does not just give up immediately, they escalate. They exhibit a temporary, frantic spike in the frequency and intensity of that behavior. Think of a toddler throwing a massive tantrum when you finally say no to a toy they always used to get. They scream louder, they kick harder, they escalate the chaos because their brain is confused. Or think of a slot machine. If you pull the lever and nothing happens, you do not just walk away immediately, you pull it again, harder, faster, convinced that the machine is just broken and needs to be forced to give you the reward you are accustomed to receiving. The old trick is failing, and they are trying to force the system to work again. This concept, studied extensively in the field of operant conditioning, explains the mechanical reality of abuse. The abuser has been conditioned to receive a specific reward for their behavior. That reward is your pain, your frustration, your endless attempts to explain yourself. When you stop providing the emotional reaction they feed on, they experience an extinction burst. They will try rage, they will try fake apologies, they will manufacture crises. They are testing the waters, frantically searching for the exact button that will make you care again. They are not acting crazy because you provoked them. They are escalating because the reinforcement stopped. You cut off the supply and they are starving. You change the rules of the game without telling them, and their entire psychological framework is short-circuiting as a result. They are running through their entire arsenal of manipulation, hoping that just one of those weapons will pierce your new armor. This is the phase where most empaths break, because the empath's natural instinct is to de-escalate. When we see someone flailing, when we see chaos, we want to smooth it over. We want to offer comfort, or at the very least, logic. We feel this physical pull, this racing heartbeat every time the phone rings, this overwhelming urge to just send one text message to calm the storm. But logic is completely useless here. You cannot reason with an extinction burst. Any response, even a negative one, even a frustrated demand to be left alone, resets the clock. It tells them that the escalation worked. It tells them that if they push hard enough, if they scream loud enough, you will eventually crack. But wait, that is not the worst part. Because of this, the picture changes entirely. We are moving into the second layer. And this is where the situation shifts from a simple behavioral reaction to something much darker. You see, an extinction burst explains the mechanics of what they are doing, but it does not explain the terrifying desperation underneath it. To understand that, we have to look at what you actually were to them. Sam Vaknin, in his work Malignant Self-Love, breaks down the core architecture of the narcissist. He explains that the narcissist does not have an authentic self. What they have is a persona, a highly curated, incredibly fragile false self that they project onto the world. This false self is an empty shell. It is a defense mechanism built in childhood to survive some early trauma or profound rejection. Because the true self was deemed unacceptable or too vulnerable, it was buried alive, and a shiny, grandiose false self was constructed to interact with the world. But because this false self is not real, it has no internal life source. It cannot generate its own self-esteem. It relies entirely on external validation to exist. They need you to react, to be angry, to be sad, to be desperate, because your reaction is the mirror that proves they exist. Your emotional response is their narcissistic supply. Without it, they are nothing. They are a void. Your empathy, your frustration, your tears, all of it serves as the fuel that keeps their artificial identity inflated. When I was working in hospice care, spending 12 years watching people navigate the very edge of life, I saw a lot of family dynamics play out in the waiting rooms and by the bedsides. You learn a lot about human nature when the stakes are that high, when the clock is running out and people can no longer hide behind their daily routines. The hospital room is a place where all the masks eventually fall off. The exhaustion strips away the polite fictions, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of who people really are. And some people are absolutely terrified of who they really are. There was always a specific pattern that emerged in highly dysfunctional families. There would be one person, usually the scapegoat, who had spent their whole life absorbing the toxicity, playing the role of the shock absorber for everyone else. They were the one who always smoothed things over, the one who took the blame, the one who sacrificed their own well-being to keep the fragile family system from collapsing. They were the designated mirror, reflecting back whatever distorted image the family needed to see. And sometimes, standing in the face of death, the proximity of the end would finally wake them up. That person would just snap out of it. They would look at the dying relative, look at the toxic family members, and they would simply stop playing the game. They would go numb to the provocations. They would drop the rope. They would stand in the corner of the room, completely detached, refusing to engage in the familiar, twisted dance of guilt and obligation. And you would think the rest of the family would focus on the dying relative, but no. The moment the scapegoat stopped providing the emotional reaction, the toxic family members would lose their minds. They would escalate their cruelty, fabricate dramas in the hallway, try to drag the scapegoat back into the mud. They would whisper, they would point fingers, they would create absolute chaos while someone was taking their last breath just down the hall. Because without the scapegoat reacting, they had to face their own reflection. They had to look at their own monstrous behavior. Without someone to carry the blame fell squarely on their own shoulders. Their entire identity was built on being superior to the scapegoat, on projecting their own flaws onto that designated victim. When the victim refused to accept the projection, the toxic individuals were left holding their own darkness. That is exactly what happens when you stop caring. When you remove your emotional supply, you are not just ignoring them. You are shattering their mirror. You are causing what Vaknin calls a severe narcissistic injury. Without your reaction to reflect their false self back to them, their image cracks. They are suddenly staring into the void of their own repressed emptiness. The escalation, the rapid cycling through rage and fake tears, the smear campaigns, none of it is really about you. It is a desperate, flailing attempt to restore the mask before it completely falls apart. They are trying to glue the mirror back together using your emotional blood. You thought you were just walking away from an argument, but to their psychological structure, you were threatening their very existence. You pulled the plug on their life support system. They are not fighting to win the argument anymore. They are fighting for survival. They are fighting to keep the illusion alive because the reality of who they are is too devastating for them to handle. The moment the mirror goes blank, they are forced to confront the terrible reality that they are empty inside. When I hit my own burnout at 39, when my marriage collapsed and I found myself sitting in an empty apartment staring at a copy of Memories, Dreams, Reflections that my therapist handed me, I realized something terrifying. I realized that my own empathy had been weaponized against me for years. I had mistaken my ability to absorb other people's pain for strength. I thought I was being the strong one, the one who could handle the darkness. But really, I was just providing a very convenient mirror for people who refused to look at themselves. I was taking on their shadows so they could pretend they were only made of light. I would spend my nights walking alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains just trying to process the sheer volume of emotional debris I had collected from other people. And when I stopped doing that, when I stopped being the emotional dumping ground, the reactions I got were identical to what you are experiencing now. The shock, the indignation, the sudden escalation of cruelty. People who claimed to love me suddenly turned vicious, simply because I refused to play the role of the shock absorber anymore. They were not mad that I was setting a boundary. They were terrified because the boundary forced them to look at their own reflection. They had relied on me to process their emotional garbage, and without me, the garbage was piling up in their own living room. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. This is the third layer, the one nobody wants to hear. We like to think that the narcissist is a mastermind, a calculated predator who is always 10 steps ahead, playing chess with our emotions. We give them that power because it is easier to believe we were outsmarted by an evil genius than to accept the pathetic truth. We construct this narrative where they are brilliant tacticians, flawlessly executing a grand plan to destroy our lives. It gives our suffering a sense of meaning. It makes us feel like we were targeted because we were special, because we were worthy opponents in some dark psychological war. But this narrative is a lie that we tell ourselves to avoid looking at the much scarier reality. The truth is far less glamorous. The truth that Carl Jung exposed in his deeply unsettling work, Aion. Jung wrote about what happens when the persona cracks under pressure. He said that for a fragile ego, encountering the shadow is a catastrophic experience. When the persona cannot be maintained, when the external validation dries up, the individual is overwhelmed by the repressed, unacceptable parts of themselves they have been desperately hiding. They do not just feel bad, they psychologically disintegrate. They experience an internal collapse that is so profound and terrifying that it mimics psychological death. Jung explained that the shadow contains everything the ego refuses to acknowledge about itself. For a narcissist, the shadow is an abyss of shame, worthlessness, and profound inadequacy. Their entire life is a frantic sprint away from this shadow. They build an entire universe of lies just to avoid looking into that abyss. But when you stop reacting, when you remove the mirror, they trip, and the shadow catches up to them. The darkness they have projected onto you for so long finally recoils back onto them, and they are completely unequipped to handle it. Their psyche begins to tear itself apart from the inside out. Go back for a second to that phrase from the beginning. It makes sense to assume that when you finally stop reacting, they will eventually just go away. You see now what that assumption was hiding. It was the logical answer. Anyone would arrive there. But it assumed you were dealing with a whole person who could just walk away. It assumed there was an integrated human being behind the mask who could process rejection, accept defeat, and move on. There is not. There is nothing but a fractured, terrifying void holding onto a mask for dear life. You were not fighting a person. You were fighting a defense mechanism. When you stop caring, you are not just triggering a behavioral extinction burst. You are forcing a catastrophic collision between their fragile ego and their overwhelming shadow. What leaks out through the cracks of their persona is the pure, unadulterated chaos of everything they have spent their life denying. The cruelty, the panic, the absolute lack of a center, the profound inadequacy they have been running from since childhood. You are not witnessing a master manipulator executing a brilliant new strategy to win you back. You are watching a psychological collapse in real time. It is ugly, it is messy, and it is profoundly pathetic. The monster is not growing stronger. The monster is suffocating, and it is thrashing violently as it goes down. They are terrified, not of losing you, but of being left alone in the dark with the horrific reality of who they actually are. They are terrified of the silence because the silence forces them to listen to the echo of their own emptiness. The grandiosity, the arrogance, the manipulation, all of it was just a fragile shield to protect them from the crushing weight of their own insignificance. And when you remove your reaction, you strip away the shield. You expose them to the very thing they fear most, their own true self. Or rather, the devastating absence of a true self. They escalate because they are trying to drown out the silence. They manufacture crises because the external chaos is infinitely more bearable than the internal void. Every frantic voicemail, every fabricated drama, every malicious rumor is a desperate attempt to create noise, any noise, to distract them from the agonizing reality of their own reflection. They are running from a ghost, and they will tear down anyone who stops providing them with a place to hide. This brings us to the fourth layer. What this means for you, right now, wherever you are sitting while listening to this. You have been torturing yourself. You have been watching them act crazy, watching them throw everything at the wall, and you have been asking yourself if you made a mistake. You have been wondering if you provoked them by going silent. You have been sitting awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the sequence of events, trying to find the exact moment where you messed up, where you pushed them too far. You have been tempted to just respond this one time, just to set the record straight, just to defend yourself against the smear campaign, thinking maybe then they will finally stop. You believe that if you can just explain your side clearly enough, if you can just make them understand your boundary, the chaos will subside. You are carrying the guilt of their escalation. You think their worsening behavior is a sign that you did something wrong, that you failed to handle the situation correctly. You are an empath, so your default setting is to absorb the blame and try to fix the environment. You have spent your entire life believing that if someone else is upset, it must be your responsibility to soothe them. You have been conditioned to believe that someone else's emotional regulation is your job. But you cannot soothe this. You cannot fix a fractured persona. You cannot fill a void that has no bottom. It does not matter how much love, how much patience, or how much understanding you pour into them. It will never be enough because there is no self there to receive it. The chaos you are watching is not your punishment, it is your receipt. Every frantic voicemail, every fake emergency, every malicious rumor is proof that your boundary is working perfectly. If they are escalating, it means you have successfully cut off the supply. It means they are starving. It means the false self is cracking under the pressure of your silence. The worst thing you could possibly do right now is break your silence. Do not try to reason with a drowning persona. Do not hand them the mirror back just because they are screaming that they cannot see themselves. Let the mirror stay broken. Let them thrash. Every second you stay silent, you are winning your life back. Their escalation is not a signal for you to intervene. It is the ultimate confirmation that you are finally free. You did not cause their madness. You simply stopped shielding them from it. You stopped being the container for their shadow, and now they have to hold it themselves. And they have absolutely no idea how. They will stumble, they will fall, they will blame you for their bruised knees, but it is no longer your problem to solve. They will have to sit in the darkness they created, without you there to light the room on fire just to keep them warm. The hardest part of walking away is not the initial decision. The hardest part is surviving the extinction burst without flinching. It is standing firm in the hurricane of their desperation and refusing to let it pull you back in. You have to understand that their reaction is a testament to your strength, not your cruelty. You are not being mean by ignoring them. You are finally allowing reality to take its course. You are letting gravity do its job. For years, you carried the weight of two people. You carried their emotional regulation, their self-esteem, their stability. Now that you have put that weight down, they are collapsing under it. So when the phone rings with another frantic accusation, when the flying monkeys start circling with their fabricated stories, I want you to remember what is actually happening. You are not under attack. You are watching a psychological structure collapse under its own unsustainable weight. You are a witness to the inevitable breaking of a false self. You do not need to defend yourself. You do not need to explain. You just need to keep walking and let the chaos burn itself out behind you. The silence on the other side of this storm is worth every single step you take to get there. It is the silence of your own reclaimed peace, the quiet space where you finally get to meet yourself again. If this breakdown of the psychological reality behind the chaos brought you some clarity today, consider leaving a super thanks. It is not just about supporting the channel, It is what allows me to keep digging into these uncomfortable truths, bringing you the mechanics of the shadow that you will not find in surface-level advice. It helps keep this space running for all of us who are trying to navigate the dark, finding the vocabulary to name the things we have felt but could never quite articulate. It helps us build a map out of the labyrinth. Now, I want to hear from you. Which layer shocked you most? Was it the extinction burst, the cracking of the false self, or the catastrophic encounter with the shadow? Tell me down below. To understand this at an even deeper level, we must look at how Carl Jung viewed the role of the empath in the broader spectrum of the collective unconscious. Empaths are naturally attuned to the unexpressed emotions floating in the psychological atmosphere. We pick up on the grief, the anger, and the repressed shame that others refuse to process. In ancient times, this sensitivity made us the healers, the shamans, the ones who could navigate the unseen world and bring back insight. But in modern society, especially in toxic relationship dynamics, this sensitivity becomes a magnet for the exact types of people who are running from their own shadows. The narcissist relies on the empath to process the toxic material they continuously generate but refuse to hold. When the empath stops functioning as the psychological waste management system, the toxic material backs up into the narcissist's own system, causing the catastrophic system failure we call the extinction burst. You're not just ending a relationship, you are fundamentally altering the psychological ecosystem that allowed their false self to survive. And that is why the reaction is so incredibly violent. The organism is fighting to maintain homeostasis, and you have become the catalyst for its inevitable collapse. The journey you are on is incredibly difficult. It challenges every instinct you were taught to have. But every day you hold the line, you are proving to yourself that your peace is worth protecting. You are no longer the shock absorber, you are the immovable mountain, and the storm will pass.